So I'm curious, how did you get started in the field of parapsychology?
Well, I've always had an interest since I was a little kid. Probably too many comic books and science fiction movies and TV shows and books. It just was something that I stumbled across in some respects from watching TV shows with ghosts and psychic powers and things. And I was very lucky in the library to find books on the science of parapsychology. I mean, I stumbled across those in some respects, having heard the word parapsychology probably for the first time watching a TV show called Dark Shadows in the 60s. I was a science geek as a kid, but I was really interested in folklore as well, and this was the field that kind of brought it all together. So, reading books by J.B. Rhine and J.G. Pratt and some of the early folks in the scientific area in the laboratory response of parapsychology set me off to talk to some of my teachers about it in school, and I ended up with a physics teacher and an earth science teacher who sponsored a parapsychology club for us in high school back on the East Coast. I also got a chance to meet a couple of very famous parapsychologists. One of them was Hans Holzer, but the other two who were more involved in the field, Gertrude Schmeidler and Montague Ullman, both lived in my area. Both were known to one of my neighbors, as it turned out, and they became one became my boss a few years, like 10 years later, and the other one, and both of them became colleagues of mine over the years. So it kind of set me on a path.
What are some compelling cases? I know you teach a ghost hunting class. Can you tell us about some interesting cases?
Well, I've been doing investigations since '79, and been teaching this subject, teaching parapsychology in general, since the early '80s, including investigations class. The class I teach right now is more of a kind of a methodology, kind of how you do it. Over the years, I've had a wide range of cases, and we have 3 different types of phenomena that people often call ghostly, which would certainly end up on the shows as paranormal. There are the traditional ghost cases, which would be what we would call an apparition case. Ghost has a lot of different cultural ties to different meanings around the world. So even though I still use the word ghost, because most people understand in Western culture that it's the spirit of someone who died, we still tend to use the word apparition more. And there are cases of living apparitions, of people who are not dead, who appear as ghosts to people. So we have those kinds of cases as well, and we have to kind of look across the board at a ghost or apparition being someone outside their body or without a body who is appearing or interacting with people. Then we have the haunting cases, which a lot of ghost hunters call residual hauntings, and it's the idea that places hold information, and that people pick up information. Like the information could be something like the apparent sounds of footsteps, or rattling pots and pans in a kitchen, or a figure walking up and down the hallway, or a murder happening. And what we have come to know in parapsychology is that these are cases of the environment somehow recording the living people, not the dead. And in fact, a lot of our haunting cases are recordings or imprints of the activity of living people who are still alive but not living in that house anymore. And we've even had cases where people have come home and open the door and they see a figure standing in the hallway and they realize it's them.
Themselves.
They see themselves. Because they're seeing a recording.
Whoa.
Now, it's about the witness being somewhat psychic and picking that up, although we actually have a model that would be more along the biological brain connection to the Earth's magnetic field. So there's a couple possibilities we think about for that. We just haven't had the money to test them in some respects. But you can see, if you have a home and there's somebody who suddenly pops up in your living room, or you just see a figure there, that figure could be a residue of somebody who used to live there, or that figure could be an apparition. It could be somebody who's deceased who's popping in for whatever reason. So it's until you start talking to that person or trying to interact, you don't know whether it's live or a recording. So you have to play with that. And then we have those cases where physical objects and physical phenomena happens, whether it's electronics going screwy, things moving around, flying around, unusual wrappings and noises that are purely physical. In apparition and haunting cases, you could have 5 people in the room and only 2 people see or experience something. Because not everybody's open to having the psychic experience of seeing or hearing an apparition, or any of the hauntings. In poltergeist cases, the stuff is truly physical. So if something moves and breaks, if you're looking in that direction, you're going to see it move. And if you're going to certainly see it having broken on the ground, you'll hear it crash and so on. Those cases come from living people, not from the dead. With rare exception, poltergeist cases surround chaotic activity that is a result of a living person's unconscious, basically having a psychokinetic or mind over matter temper tantrum, kind of blowing off steam. Although in some of the cases, thanks to some studies that have been done in our field, we know that a percentage of the cases seem to be connected to epilepsy or epileptiform activity on the part of the agent. And we do have occasional cases where, with ghosts or apparitions, where they're moving objects, but they tend to be more playful and tend to be less chaotic, and rarely do they break things. I think that living people, or dead people, seem to be much more respectful of people's property than that part of us that would love to blow off steam by breaking things around us.
Huh.
When we're stressed or pissed off, most people would like to hit something.
Right.
And that's kind of what a poltergeist is. So when we got these cases, I've had all types of these cases. I've even had combination cases where there have been multiple things going on over the years. And when we look into any report of something paranormal or ghostly going on, we have to figure out, is it any of these? But we also have to figure out if there are normal explanations for any of this. And in every case I've done, there's been some part of it, sometimes a majority of what people are experiencing or reporting that they're experiencing, that has very normal explanation for it. So even in some of the best cases, we typically have that. Unless the people are not afraid, in which case they're really good reporters of what's going on, which is always interesting. And there have been a few of those. One of my favorite cases was back in the 80s, and I had a family that was perfectly okay with their ghosts. They just wanted to know if it was okay for their 12-year-old to be growing up talking to a ghost every day. And right before the woman had called me, she had seen the ghost, her husband had seen the ghost, her mother, when she came to visit, had seen the ghost. They weren't talking to each other. And it was the son, the 12-year-old boy, who had said, we've been living here for a year and a half, and he pretty much said, you're seeing the ghost. And his mother said, how do you know? And he said, well, the ghost told me. Lois is the name of the ghost, told him. She was the previous owner of the house. And he was apparently having conversations with her every day. He claimed she was even helping him with his homework. And his grades actually had gotten better, so the mother was pretty okay with that. So we went in, and we had a lot of really good information coming through this boy. He basically acted as translator for the ghost and provided us all sorts of family stories. The contact with the woman's only living relative, that's how we found. I actually went and met with a guy who was in his early 90s in an assisted living facility, and I would start a family story that the ghost had told the boy, apparently, and he would finish it.
Wow.
So there was a lot of really interesting corroboration to this. And then we had a couple of other things going on. I didn't have a psychic with me, so I couldn't tell you. This was before we had any of the equipment. I couldn't tell you that we were getting all sorts of readings and things. And what did happen, however, is that the ghost actually asked us questions, myself and the other two, my students who came along with me. And the questions were relevant directly to a conversation we had had on the drive from the university to the house. Had nothing to do with ghosts. Had nothing to do with the case.
Wow.
So it was interesting when I said, how does she know to ask us this question? The boy actually kind of looked over, and he started kind of looking a little bit sheepish and said, you may not like this, but she didn't trust you guys. So she got in your car at the university and drove down with you and listened to your conversation. And this was only a few months after Ghostbusters was out, so I think that a lot of ghosts were probably worried about being blasted or trapped or something like that.
I see. So this leads me to the one thing that was interesting. So this kind of ghost can travel.
Most ghosts seem to be able to travel. They don't travel, and it seemed, from my experience in working with the psychics, the mediums, and the witnesses over the years, it's become clearer and clearer that they don't travel because they don't think they can.
Really?
They never thought of it. And so actually, one of my co-author on my last book, Annette Martin, who was a psychic I worked with for many years, she and I, in one of our favorite cases, which is the Moss Beach Distillery just down on the coast, we were having an evening, you can call it a seance, but a communication session. It was certainly in full light. We had all had dinner. We had a bunch of people around. People were asking questions of the ghost. And Annette was kind of channeling the ghost, let the ghost come in, doing a little trance mediumship. And one of the questions I asked was whether, had she wanted to go anywhere when she was alive. And we already knew that she would travel to San Francisco or to San Jose. She actually visited Annette sometimes at Annette's house in San Jose. So we knew that she traveled a little bit. And the response was, I always wanted to go to Paris when I was alive. And I kind of said, why don't you go to Paris? And I kiddingly said, but if you do, send me a postcard. So a couple months later, first of all, after that time, the people at the distillery said that she wasn't appearing as much. People weren't having as many experiences, like she wasn't there all the time. I got an email from a psychic, from a medium in Paris, who had tracked me down through the Institut Metaphysique, which is a psychical research organization, been around for over 100 years in Paris. And a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, actually runs the place. And this psychic had basically found out who I was from the ghost that had shown up, who had said her name was Kate. That's the name of the ghost we know at the distillery. Described this woman and she said I had to contact the parapsychologist named Lloyd in California. So it happened that this medium in Paris was connected to the Institute of Metaphysique, so she asked the guy who was running it, who knew me, and there's only one Lloyd in parapsychology, and that's me. So it was really interesting. I kind of got the postcard as an email.
Yeah.
And then there's been a medium up in Canada who has communicated with her a few times, and a few other people have occasionally, I get a line from people sometimes saying that she's traveling around.
Wow.
So you can't prove any of this. I can't prove any of it all, but it's really interesting when things like that happen. And we've had the luck of using that technique of asking ghosts, for example, on a case, rather than trying to put them to the light if they didn't want to go to the light, or trying to convince them to leave the house. We just ask them a simple question: was there any place when you were alive that you wanted to go? I had a case a couple of years ago where I was down in Hayward, and actually I knew the people who lived in the house. They'd moved in a couple of years before, and they were actually people I knew through a friend of mine. I'd known them for years, and I didn't know they were in this house. This ghost was bothering him. It turned out to be the guy who used to live there. He had a protracted illness and died in the house. And then we found out that he was not only appearing at the house there, but also appearing at his widow's house in Vallejo. He was kind of splitting his time between the house that he loved and where his wife was. And we tried to convince him to leave the house, and he kept on saying, no, I love this house, I built this house, that kind of thing. And we asked the question. And the medium, who had not done that sort of thing, she looked at me like, you want me to ask him what? I just said, ask him. And she looks over at the spot where she says the ghost is, and she starts laughing. And she said, he's surprised. I said, okay, well, still ask him. And she did. And she said, he always wanted to go on safari when he was alive. And I explained something Annette and I had worked out. You don't need a plane ticket. You don't need a boat ticket. Just, hop a plane, you can get full up in front of a lion and not have to worry about it.
Right.
You're dead. What can he do to you? So, again, we can't prove any of this sort of thing, but I can tell you that the family never had an experience with him again. And when I did talk to the widow again, she said that he had appeared to say goodbye, and then he was gone. I don't know if he's come back, but he hasn't come back to the house in Hayward, at least. So I'm assuming that he either moved on to wherever it is they move, to the light, or he went on safari, and maybe he's having a great time somewhere else. So and there are many stories in the literature of ghosts who have appeared in multiple places. And so it's not such an unusual idea.
Right.